Wednesday. Thursday was his first workshop. It's been the best I've ever seen anyone, absolutely anyone. So seriously, Bjorn, the best we've seen so far. I know he's got lots to talk about with his huge, powerful voice. But please welcome Bjorn Bjorholm.
Okay, can you guys hear me on the mic all right? Good? All right. First off, thanks for having me. This is my first time in Australia. It's been a lot of fun so far. I think we should probably give David a round of applause too, because he did this all. I'm going to be working on this black pine tonight. What I do in Japan a lot at Koken Nursery is a lot of refinement type work. So I want to kind of show that off to you guys tonight with this tree. It's not your typical demo where you take a piece of raw material and you turn it into something, where you set the bones. The bones on this tree are pretty much set. I want to take it to the next level and do a little bit of refinement work on it. So I'll try to make this as interesting as I possibly can for you guys. But if you have any questions as I go through this, please feel free just to shout them out. No need to raise your hands or anything, and I'll try to answer them as I go. So first things first, I want to pick a front for this tree. The tree was obviously designed with this as the front in mind. But when I look at it from here, all I see are kind of outstretched arms. It just looks kind of boring. The trunk bulges at the base, runs away from us, then comes back, and then runs away from us. So you don't get much of a curve out of it from this angle. So I thought we might explore a little bit some of the different angles together and see if we can pick a good front to work with. So I'm going to start down here. I'll eventually move behind so you guys can see a little bit better, but it's just easier for me to talk about it from here. So to me, I see a couple of different potential fronts. One would be in this general area here, right? You can see it up on the screen there. What I like about this is the movement is very elegant. Spin a little more, so kind of right in this area. The movement is very elegant. The branch placement is decent on it. The only issue is the base of the tree is a bit funky down here. We could correct that with some root grass or by burying it a little bit more in the pot. If we use this as the front, we'll be tilting it slightly, right? So that's not bad there. Another good front would be almost the exact opposite side, so somewhere kind of right in this area here. And in this case, we would also be tilting it. So what I like about this side, you got the nice root flare to it. Again, decent movement all the way up to the top of the tree. It's very elegant. An issue with this side would be the scar at the top here. I think we may be able to hide that if we were to use this as the front. So what do you guys think would be the better front? This one? Or this one in here?
Second one.
Second one? Second one? Okay, I'm kind of leaning towards that myself as well. So what we're going to have to do if we make this the front of the tree is figure out what to do with this branch. Got a couple options. We could cut it off completely. That's one option. Saves us a lot of work. The other option would be to, because it's coming straight out at us here, would be to put some heavy wire on it, crank it off to the right there, and that'd be our first branch. I'm leaning a little bit more towards trying to incorporate it for now. Because we always have the option to get rid of it later if we end up not liking it. So first things first, let's set the angle here, try to get the best possible angle out of the tree. I'm also going to shorten the overall height of the tree a little bit. I've been talking about it all week at the workshops, but what I see as I travel around the world, in most countries outside of Japan, are trees with apexes that are way too tall, and it looks like the neck is kind of stretched. And that's the case with this tree, so I want to shrink this down as much as possible. We'll do two things when we get to the top. We'll cut off what is the apex now, which is this chunk right here. We'll use this as the new apex, but we'll really crank it down towards the front there. So that'll bring that kind of long-necked appearance down a little bit. What that'll do is make the tree look much more powerful. You have a bigger base to the plant, and it'll make it look older as well. So, all right. That's not bad. It's still leaning a little bit towards the back, so let's see if we can move it forward just slightly more here. It's getting a little bit better.
Now you've got the okay of the owner to do all that, have you?
Did I?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
All good.
Right, so something along these lines. If you look at it from the side here, let's see. Yeah, this will be the side. We're going to have to get some better way to do it there. We still want it to lean slightly forward, right? Which we've got. We've got that apex leaning slightly forward. The trunk doesn't run away from us as much as the original front. So this may be an issue here. we'll see if we can work with that to start with. It may slip around a little bit, but we'll set it back up. So first things first, with any tree that we're styling, whether it's setting the bones.
Just throwing trunks.
Yeah, we'll just throw it on.
Yeah, I think so.
There we go. That's a little bit better. Okay. Yeah, so first things first, we're going to have to clean it up a little bit before we start the wiring process. I've been talking about it all week in the workshops. There are a few sort of objective things that we look for when we cut branches off, right? So all of these trees are apically dominant, meaning they grow upward towards the light. But as bonsai, we want them to have nice, soft lateral branching. So to create that effect, we have to get rid of the heavy upward growth. Otherwise, what will end up happening is that heavy upward growth will continue to grow towards the light, get stronger and stronger. Your lateral branches will weaken and eventually die, and you'll be left with a weird elbow-shaped branch. So this tree's been maintained pretty well, so there shouldn't be a whole lot of that going on. Let's see if we can find a couple of examples here. Might maybe try to close up on the camera here. See if we can find some stuff. Now with the black pines too, we're looking to cut everything back to a bifurcating branch structure, so back to twos. So I'm going to do that as well as cut off the heavy branches. So. Okay. Can you see that? It might be very difficult to see. We've got a heavy branch that's growing up right here. Right, we've got a nice soft branch here, a little bud right there. I want to cut back to that bud. Right. And we'll still get that 3D look to the branch with this smaller bud back in here. Let's see. Yeah, right there. This will still help us create kind of an upward around the top to the branch, but we've gotten rid of the really heavy one here. If we left that heavy one alone, these out here probably would have, these lateral branches would have died off eventually, and we would have been left with just a stick straight branch at the top. So you always want to cut that stuff off. And that goes for junipers, it goes for maples, really any species that you're using for bonsai that's apically dominant. Yeah, we're good.
Good.
Yeah. So you want to go through all of your trees and do that. Now with the black pines, in years that you're going to be wiring the trees, we want to clean out the 2-year-old needles. Black pines will retain their needles for 2 years. So we want to go through and clean out all the 2-year-old needles so that we can actually see the structure of the tree before we start wiring. Let's see if we, looks like that may have been done already. Did you do quite a bit of cleaning out? Okay. So that's been taken care of, so I don't really have an example to show you guys, but this is what it would look like if it was cleaned out. So you can see the structure of the tree a little bit better here, right? Okay.
Too good a job, David.
All right, now with this being the first branch here, we want it to be relatively long, but it still has to be in balance with the weight of the tree. And right now, it's a bit too long, a bit too heavy. So this is nice out here. There's a lot of soft stuff we can use. This branch here is getting a bit too long. We've got some nice soft lateral branches that we can cut back to. This is why it's important to keep your inner buds alive on your trees, so that eventually, as they elongate too much, you have something to cut back to and keep the overall size of the tree small. Right, now, even though this is growing up right here, it's soft enough that we can pull it down and continue to create that nice outer kind of hand-shaped pad. You guys have any questions so far? Well, also, feel free to ask questions about the tree or what goes on in Japan or whatever comes to mind. So it doesn't have to be directly related to the plant. Okay, again, here we've got 3 coming out of the same space, the same area. So I want to cut back to 2. We'll get rid of this weird one in the middle here. All right, making it softer. Now eventually, as this gets way too long, if we maintain these branches back here towards the inside, we can cut all the way back to there and start to branch over again. So you can potentially keep the tree about the same size forever. Is everybody here kind of familiar with how to decandle black pines? Do you guys want to cover some of that? Covered? Okay. All right. It's a little difficult to explain in words without actually having the candles here to cut back and show you, but I'll try my best. Just for reference, if you want to see a video of this technique that I'm about to talk about, you can go to YouTube and type in my name, or you can type in the Bonsai Art of Japan, which is a video series that I filmed. And if you look for episode number 7, it covers Japanese black and red pines. So we'll talk about these techniques in detail. But what you'll want to do in summer, as the candles elongate, so these would be the candles from the end of the buds here, they'll elongate out, right? You want to go through and identify the medium strength, the weak, and the strong. So you can divide them into 3 basic categories. And the way you tell which ones are strong versus which ones are weak, versus which ones are medium strength, is by the thickness of the candle and the length of the candle. So what I look for is with the candle, you have it elongate out, right? You have last year's needles at the base. You've got the new candle that elongates. The very strong ones will elongate very far, and the needles will start to grow from out here, and you'll have a pretty big space between last year's needles and the new growth. So that thing is called a jiku in Japanese, J-I-K-U. It's basically just the space on the candle between the new growth and the old growth, right? So the longer and thicker that is, the stronger the shoot is. The shorter and smaller that is, the weaker the shoot is. So after you identified the medium strength, the weak, and the strong, you want to go through and cut off all of the medium strength shoots, all the way back to the very base. Right? We're going to leave the weak ones completely alone, because if we cut them off, they probably won't flush out again. Right? So we'll cut all of the medium strength ones off, all the way back to the base. And then we want to wait about 10 days, maybe 12 days later, and then we'll go back and cut the strong ones back all the way to the base. What that does is it allows the medium strength ones to start to put out a second flush of growth before the strong ones, so they have time to flush out. And the second one, when we cut the strong ones, when they flush out, they'll basically be about the same strength by the fall. So that sounds incredibly confusing, but it's actually really easy to understand if you watch that video, so go check it out.
What time of the year do you do that?
So for us in Japan, we start that process on June 20th, and we usually do the bigger trees first. So that would be our summer, so you're going to have to flip it around. So from what I understand here, December is the best time to do it. And you have to experiment with exactly what time in December is best for getting the optimal needle length. The later in the season that you cut those candles, the smaller the second flush of growth is going to be. So with the bigger trees, start with them first, a little bit earlier in the season, then work down to your medium-sized trees, and then to your shogun trees. That way you can get the proper size needles. So that's part of the energy balancing process with black pines. Now, after you cut the candles and they flush out, you're going to get in the area where you cut a single candle, you'll end up with anywhere from 2 to 5. So in the fall, after they've completely hardened, you're going to go back and cut back to 2. This is the second part of balancing the energy on a black pine. Try to find the 2 that are lateral and that are also relatively similar in strength, which would be kind of the medium-sized strength buds on the entire tree, and cut back to those. If you don't have lateral growth and your 2 medium strength or your 2 equal in size new buds are vertical, you can cut back to those as long as you can twist them down and make them lateral. So there's some heavy stuff going on in here. We'll cut that off.
Bjorn, I think I heard you say during the workshops about that needle plucking, removing the 2-year-old needles.
Yes.
Do you do that every year?
No, we don't do that every year. That's a good question. So, only on years that we're, I'll get up behind the tree now. Only on years that we're wiring the tree, we'll take off all of the 2-year-old needles. If you take the 2-year-old needles off every single year, year after year, you're going to weaken the tree. So only on the years that you're going to wire the tree will you do that. That way you can see the inner structure and actually get that on there. Otherwise, what we'll do is take off. It's case by case with each tree, but what we'll normally do is take off the 2-year-old needles on the bottom of the branch to clean it up. Maybe take a few off the top as well, just to thin it out a little bit, particularly in strong areas. We'll thin it out more than we will in weak areas. And then we may actually take off some of the 1-year-old needles as well at that same time. So.
If we only do it in years we're wiring, some of our members will never do it.
Hopefully the workshops over the last few days have inspired you guys to start wiring your trees a little bit more. You can see the results around the room. So
Everybody did a really good job.
So just still basic cleaning here. We may not finish the entire tree detailing. What I want to do is set the bones, and then we'll start back down at the bottom and actually refine that one so you guys can at least see an example of what that looks like. So normally a tree of this size with this many small branches on it would probably end up taking at least a full day to detail it out. But we'll see how much we can get hammered out tonight. It's actually really hot up here. So what we typically do at Kogen, which is where I work in Japan, with the black pines, we'll do the decandling, the needle plucking, and the wiring all at the same time in June or early July. That way we don't have to spend so much time on the trees, working once in the summer and then once again in the fall. We just do it all at once.
What do you do regarding if you want to reduce the needle size of a black pine?
Right, so part of the process is, like I just mentioned, with the candle removal, the candle cutting in the summer. The later in the season you do it, the smaller that second flush will be. The other part would be, with black pines, what we'll start doing is, at about this time of year as they start to move, we'll fertilize them very heavily. And the fertilizer cakes that we use in Japan, they're organic cakes that usually last about 4 to 5 weeks. So fertilize heavy in the spring. We'll put the last application on about 4 to 5 weeks before we know we're going to be cutting the candles. That way it tapers off. Then we'll remove the fertilizer at the time that we cut the candles, and we'll leave the fertilizer off completely until that second flush of growth completely hardens off in the fall. So for us, that means no fertilizer from June up until about late September, early October. Here, that'd probably be December through, what do you think, maybe March or so, something like that, right? Until they completely harden off. And that's one way to help reduce the needle length on the trees. We'll shorten this one back as well. This tree has pretty flexible branches. Most black pines do. If we were working with a red pine, it would be a bit more brittle. So we have to be a little bit more careful. All right. So you can see we've got the first 1, 2, 3 branches here cleaned up. Just do a little bit more cleaning towards the top. And then we'll start the wiring process.
As you're doing that, Bjorn, do you want to give everyone a bit of a rundown how you got into bonsai and
Sure,
how you
yeah.
went through it all?
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw the Karate Kid movies when I was 12 years old. I'd been doing karate from about the age of 8 up until then. And
Were you 6'5" then too?
pretty close to it. Right? Yeah, so I had been doing karate for quite a number of years, and saw the Karate Kid movies and got interested in Japanese culture and whatnot. And asked for one for my 13th birthday, so I got one of those little home center little junipers with the rocks glued on top with the little Mr. Miyagi Mudman figure. And I ended up killing it within about 2 weeks. Kept it on my nightstand in my room. But ever since then, it became an obsession. I think that's probably true for a lot of people in this room. Yeah, during university, I studied Japanese language and business. And as part of my program, I had to go to Japan for a year of study abroad to finish my language requirements. So at that time, I decided that bonsai was probably something I wanted to pursue. once I finished my undergraduate degree. So after I finished that year of study abroad, I went back to the States, finished my degree, and then immediately about 2 weeks later moved back to Japan to become an apprentice at Kokaen. So Kokaen is a nursery in Osaka, and the current owner, Keiichi Fujikawa, who is my oyakata, or my teacher, he is the second generation owner. The nursery was founded by his father in, I think it was 1956 or 1958, and it originally was a flower shop. So he would grow stuff from seed to sell wholesale to local retail outlets. And on one trip down to Kyushu, which is one of the most southern islands of Japan, he saw some Satsuki azaleas growing up on the mountainside. They were very expensive. This was, the late 50s, so they were about 7,000 yen at the time, and the flowers that he had been selling prior to that were only about 70 yen, so a huge difference in price. 7,000 yen today would only be about maybe 70 bucks, 70 Australian dollars, something like that. But back then it was worth a whole lot more. So he bought a couple of them, spent a whole bunch of money at the time on those azaleas, brought them back, and they sold for quadruple what he paid for them in 2 days. So he decided that would be a good business to get into. So he immediately jumped in his truck, drove back down to Kyushu, and started buying truckloads of them. And every time that he would bring them back to his nursery in Osaka, there'd be a line of people waiting around the corner to buy them. So that became his business focus. And in the 1970s, the azalea boom was over. So he decided to shift his focus to bonsai, which turned out to be a very lucrative idea. So his son, Keiichi Fujikawa, who's my boss, studied at Saburo Kato's nursery in Tokyo for about 5.5 years back in the late 1980s. And he got certified by the Japanese Bonsai Association through that nursery, and then he took over the nursery in the early 90s. So a little bit of history about the shop there, but the focus now is entirely bonsai. We have 0 azaleas at the nursery. Everywhere I go in the world, people ask me about azaleas, and I always tell them the same thing, that I have no idea. So just point them in the right direction to different resources to learn about it. But Fujikawa-san, my teacher, he hates azaleas. They're a bit fickle to work with. You have to repot them at just the right time, and as soon as they start to kind of taper off in terms of health, you're basically done. So they're not the best investment. But the work that we do now, like I mentioned earlier, is mostly refinement work. So every nursery in Japan is very specialized in something. So we specialize in a huge range of species, but high quality top-end material. So Fujikawa-san will travel to professional auctions around Japan. Usually goes to at least 1 or 2 per month in different cities. He'll buy material from the other professionals who brought stuff there. So normally at those auctions, you'll see anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 trees come up for sale in a single day. And it's typical, kind of like a cattle auction almost. They'll roll it up to the front. It'll be on a roller. They'll have the auctioneer screaming out numbers until they finish at the highest bid. So he'll do that, bring back the material to Osaka, and my job there is to then take that material, completely refine it. So some of those projects will take anywhere from a single day up to a week and a half. It just depends on how big the tree is and how much work is involved. I promise I won't spam you, but we'll put you on a mailing list so that you can get some information about upcoming tours. So they're all inclusive, including food. The only thing that's additional to the land package is that you buy your own plane ticket. So, yeah, if you guys want to sign up for something like that. We're also going to do a tour for 2017 in April, which will be the WBFF, World Bonsai Friendship Federation Convention. It's going to be held in Omiya. That's going to be a huge event. They've already chosen the Japanese demonstrators, so if you come to that, you'll be able to see Kimura, Takayama, Kawabe, and Shinji Suzuki do demonstrations. So it'll be a really interesting event to come to. So want to get on the mailing list for that, you can sign up.
Is that the cherry blossom time, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but the event will be at the end of April, so there won't be a whole lot of cherry blossoms left. Yeah, they usually bloom at the end of March, beginning of April. It varies from year to year. There'll be some left over by the time that event rolls around, but for the most part, they'll be done.
How long does the tour go for? Did I hear that?
Yeah, anywhere from 8 to 12 days, somewhere in that range. So each tour is slightly different. And the tour that we've got coming up this January is already fully booked. But if you wanted to come in January, you could do it in 2017.
How big are the groups that are interested?
So our tour in January has 18 people. So pretty decent sized crowd. We have people from all over Europe and the United States, but no Australians.
January is winter, isn't it?
It is winter, yeah. Yeah. It is winter. Okay. Yeah, I'm actually just going to go ahead and detail this branch up and we'll set it so you guys have a full example of what we're going for here.
What's the rough price of a tree, sort of a show quality tree?
What was that?
The price of a show quality
Price
tree.
of a show quality tree.
I noticed you were working on a big zoo show that you stayed behind to work on rather than go to
Yeah.
so something like that, or
Yeah, so it's case-by-case basis, obviously. It depends on the history of the tree and the health of the tree and so on and so forth. Trees that open in, the prices range anywhere from $50 all the way up to $150,000. So for the exhibitions, for say the Kokofu, for example, it's common for people to say, if you look at the Kokofu books, each page of the book is worth a minimum of about 10 grand. So very expensive. There are some trees that are less expensive that get in the show. It's all about quality. So there are some individual enthusiasts who are very, very talented, and they will have propagated and grown those trees themselves for decades. So the value may be very high, but they're never sold for that value.
well, who would have paid $1.2 million for that white pine?
Okay, so
Again.
Was it you?
no, I've been asked about this everywhere I go. That tree is not worth that much money. That was a marketing ploy, and it worked. But no, that tree's worth less than probably a tenth of that price. It's still an expensive tree, but it's not worth that much. So. But the fellow who sold that tree, he's very good at marketing. We'll leave it at that. So.
He'd be very happy too, wouldn't he?
Yeah. So when you're wiring a white pine, try to avoid coming in over the top, right? So I'm holding it from underneath and I'm actually spreading the needles apart. That way I don't break any of the needles on the tree. So if you come over the top and you just lightly bend them, what will happen is 2 weeks from now, the tips of this will turn all brown and you have to cut them all off. So we want to avoid that if at all possible. When I first got to Japan, my first summer there, I was the only apprentice at the nursery at that time. I was Fujikawa-san's first apprentice. And so I didn't have anybody to kind of ask questions to about certain things. Fujikawa-san is not much of a talker. He expects you to kind of learn on your own. So for me, it was learning by making mistakes. And the first summer I was there, he gave me a very nice black pine to take the wire off of, right? So a very standard kind of low-level apprentice job. So he gave me no instructions, said just cut all the wire off the tree, so I did. And 2 weeks later, I heard him screaming out in the garden. And he said, "Get out here, come look at this." So I came over to the tree. The whole outer tips on the entire plant were all brown. And I've never forgotten that since. So.
How did you do that cutting the wire?
How did we cut the wire off?
No. How did you make the tips go brown cutting the wire?
So I would reach into the top and try to jam the wire cutter in there this way and that way. So yeah, just my hands running away, smashing the needles. So.
Is your accommodation in the nursery itself, or do you ever live off site?
So it's case by case from nursery to nursery. For us at Colquhoun, all of the apprentices have apartments away from the nursery. Other nurseries, you'll actually live on campus, so to speak. But yeah, for us, Fujikawa-san, when I was an apprentice, I'm a paid employee now at the nursery. It's a little different, but when I was an apprentice, he would pay for my apartment, which ran about $300 a month, and he would pay for food, which was about $500 a month. So he ended up getting about $800 a month total, but it was just enough to scrape by. But right now I live about 15 minutes away by bike. So my wife and I have a condo bordering city. Ikeda, which is the suburb where the nursery is a bit, it's a bit industrial. And the next town over, which is Mino, is very famous for its waterfalls and its mountains, so we decided to move over there. It's a little picturesque.
Do you have a collection of that?
I don't. I do have a few trees at the nursery that are mine. They're mostly projects that I'm working on long term, and I'll sell them before I head back to the States in a few years. But no, I don't have any at our house. They would never get watered if they were there. Yeah, so our import laws are about as strict as your all's import laws are here. We have a 3-year quarantine for anything that's imported from Japan or really anywhere in the world. And the trees have to be bare rooted completely before they're brought in, and then sprayed with methyl bromide, which basically just wipes them out. So it's not worth it. Actually, importing to Europe is very easy at this point. They don't have to go through a post-quarantine in Europe, and they don't have to be bare-rooted. So they have almost 100% success rate in bringing stuff in. So a lot of our trees now get sold to our European clients. As a matter of fact, last year at the Taikon 10, which is the big exhibition in Kyoto in November, I think we sold about 3 trees to Japanese people, and the rest went to Europeans and Chinese. So the market is shifting. It's very different than it was just a few years ago. I mentioned that this is a bit tedious, but once we get it done, you guys will kind of see the benefit of this. And this is what I spend all day, every day at the nursery in Japan doing. So for me, this becomes almost like a muscle memory kind of exercise. I don't think that much about the why as it goes on.
Do you listen to music, or do you frown upon?
Yeah, so I usually have my iPhone with me, and I'll put one headphone in and leave one ear out so that I can hear Fujikawa-san if he needs something from me. But I listen to a lot of news and less music. So, although on the way to the nursery in the morning, I have a little bike that's made for Japanese-sized people. It's a bike in to work on. It's got a little basket on the front too. But I usually play some heavy death metal on the way to work, get myself pumped up for the day.
That's what Ted listens to when he's coming to bowls.
Barry, do any of those black pines that Ron Anderson is bringing, did they ever survive?
Yeah, all of them.
Have they all survived, have they, after you?
Yeah, all our trees get hit with methyl bromide as well. And the black pines were good, the tridents were good. The only things that really died were the Satsuma azaleas.
See, the azaleas, that's right.
And where are they now, Barry? Who's got those? Have you got one?
I have no idea.
No, I don't know.
He brought in maples. There were a few people that brought in the black pine.
Yeah.
I know where a couple of them are, and they're very common.
Oh. You've got one of his azaleas, and David, have you got one of Ron's azaleas?
We got, I've got a maple.
Not about azalea, but maple, yeah, maple.
I've got one of the maples, and
Yeah.
there's a few others around.
Yeah, so David, you have got one of them. I was wondering if when, about the black pine, because they'd be pretty old now, wouldn't they?
We actually don't do a whole lot of work with black pines at Gogan. There are some nurseries that specialize in them. So for example, Daijuen, which is a very famous nursery in Nagoya, they have almost exclusively black pine. So I know some of their apprentices down there, they tell me stories about working there in the summer during the decandling and needle plucking season. They'll sit down with a tree and it'll be sort of a conveyor belt thing. They'll finish one, another one will come in, and by the end of the day, they're buried almost up to their knees with pine needles. And it's day in and day out for about a month and a half straight of just plucking pine needles.
It'd be pretty strict too, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do a lot of the plucking too with tweezers. So once you, it's sort of like using chopsticks. So once you get used to it, it's actually easier to do it that way than it is with your fingers. Alright, so we try to use the least amount of wire to do the most amount of work for us. So I don't want to wire every single individual little bud. I'm going to pick strategically which buds we want to wire and then get the rest of them to kind of sit in the right position.
How long would the wire stay on for?
Ideally, we try to leave it on for at least one full growing season, hopefully two. So it just depends on the tree. It's case by case basis. We have some trees at the shop that have had the same wire on for 6-7 years. All right, so as long as it's not cutting in, we'll leave it on. If, for example, the wire starts to cut in the apex, but it's not cutting in on lower branches, we'll only cut the wire off on the apex and leave the stuff alone at the bottom. And we may immediately rewire the apex just to keep it in shape. But it's a case by case basis. So if the tree is slightly unhealthy, we may cut the wire off even if it's not cutting in. Sometimes we'll cut the wire off completely. For example, if Fujikawa-san goes to an auction and buys some material that's fully wired, but it's a bit unkempt, even if it's not cutting in, we may cut it off completely because it becomes very difficult to add pieces of wire onto wire that's already been applied and follow the same pitch and make it look nice and pretty. So sometimes it's just easier to cut it off completely and redo the whole thing, which happens quite often. So what we do at the nursery with our wire up to probably one size bigger than this. What is this? 16, probably down to about size 14 or so. Rather than leaving it on the rolls like this, which can get kind of messy, what we'll do is take a board that's about 30 centimeters long or so, very thin. We'll cut wedges on both ends, and then we'll take the wire off the rolls and wrap it around those individual boards. You won't get hard places on the wire if you do that, so that's not an issue, but it helps keep everything a little bit cleaner. So rather than having all these messy rolls all over the place, and you can already see it's getting kind of jumbled up. If you keep it on those boards like that, it makes it easier to work with. And we probably roll through a good $1,000 worth of copper wire every month. Because we've got, right now, myself, Mayoka-san, who's a Japanese artist in residence at the nursery, and then one other apprentice there. So 3 people wiring 7 days a week, non-stop.
Don't you get the weekends off?
No. Yeah, so for a typical apprenticeship, you'll be working 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You'll get, on average, 1 to 2 days off per month. During the busy season, though, it could be 2 or 3 months before you get a single day off. So
So you really love what you're doing then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't really feel like work. So,
What time do you start and finish?
so during the kind of off season, which would be the summer months, when we're not that busy, we usually operate from about 8 in the morning till anywhere from 5 to 6 in the evenings. During the busy season, which usually starts to pick up in late September, early October, and runs through March, it could be anywhere from 8 till 9, 10, 11 at night. So
Wow.
it's especially true right before the big events, like Taikon 10. We'll be out in the workshop, it'll be completely dark outside. It becomes almost impossible to see at that point, but the styling up trees for the show, and most of our business we do at the exhibitions. Setting up a sales booth, so we have to prepare all of that material as well. This takes a lot of work and a lot of time. So the most important thing is that the wire is anchored very well, so we want at least 1.5 to 2 wraps between branches, our secondary and tertiary branches, to hold. If you do any less than that, you run the risk of when you move one branch, the other branch moves, and vice versa. So the second most important thing is that it's clean and that we don't really cross anywhere. So sometimes you can't avoid that. As long as you're thinking 2 steps ahead, for the most part, you won't run into that problem. So what I want to do with this tree, because this will be incredibly tedious if we do the whole plant like this, I'll do the first branch, very refined, very clean, make it look as pretty as possible. And we'll set the bones on the rest of the tree, and then we'll see if we've got some time left to detail a little bit more at the top.
Favourite species to work on, Bjorn?
Yeah, for me, I'm a huge juniper fan, so in terms of wiring plants, that would probably be my pick. And that's a species that there is no shortage of in Japan, so we constantly have them coming to the nursery, and we'll work on those all year round. In terms of sort of long-term development and plants that I just enjoy looking at, I would say flowering apricots are probably at the top for me. We have some of the best ones in the entire country in Japan at Kokaen. So what's interesting about them is you can, even on old trees, you can graft them and regenerate them pretty quickly. So you can graft them in February, so scion grafting, which is where you take a branch off of one part of the plant and graft it into another section. If you do it properly and the trees are healthy enough, you can defoliate that same graft only a couple months later in May. And when you defoliate, you can wire, and you'll get twice as much growth out of it when the new growth flushes out. So you can get a fully ramified branch structure in 6 to 8 years on a very old tree, which doesn't work with a lot of species. Plus, the other nice thing about flowering apricots is you get the contrast between the dainty flowers and the gnarly bark on it, which is really cool to see in the winter. But doing a demo with the flowering apricot doesn't really work, so. So I think it's probably quite obvious, but the reason that we use the copper wire for conifers and to do this detail type work is that it stiffens when you apply it, and you can use a lot smaller gauge than you would with aluminium to get it to hold. So there's no way we can do this detail work with aluminium. It'd just be too heavy.
So what gauge is that you're using now?
This right here is 19. Yeah, and we'll go down all the way down to 22 or so. When we're doing this detail work. And there's, it's very tedious when you first start doing this kind of work, but as you build up speed and you build up an understanding as to how to apply the wire without crossing, and so on and so forth. It actually becomes very fun. You get stuff done very quickly, but you got to get over that hump there, which for the most part, for most people, ends up taking a solid probably 2 years as an apprentice before you really get past that kind of tedium.
It's not a good time to snap it up.
So just trying to move it back there a little bit. What we want to avoid when we're setting branches is a big bow to the branch. This branch is a little difficult to get the bow out of, but what I'll do is put a guy wire on and see if we can crank this section down a little bit. Luckily we have this smaller branch here in the front that we can use to kind of hide the fact that it's very thick here and goes up and back down. If you can avoid getting that bow in the branch though, and have the branch come out on a very sharp downward angle, it'll look much more powerful. So it's a case-by-case basis. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but we'll see if we can get that out of there a little bit with the guy wire. So we could also wedge the wood underneath the branch here. So take out a little bit of a wedge and push it down. I like to try to avoid that if we can, and I think we may be able to get away without doing that. Do we have any rubber by chance? So I'm going to take this guy wire and stick it underneath the roots here, and then we'll wrap the 2 ends up and over the top of the branch right here. We've got the wrap wire on here first, so I can use that as a buffer without having to put any rubber on the top. I just need it for the roots here to keep them from getting all cut up. So. Someone searching for rubber?
Yep, someone needs it.
All right.
You hear the mess.
There we go. All right. Excellent. Thank you. You can use rubber like this, or you can use tubing. Either one is fine. Okay, so we want the 2 pieces to meet on top of the branch. We'll take our gin pliers. Now we want to pull and twist, right? So if you just hold the wire in place and twist it over and over and over again, you're heating up the same section of the wire and it'll snap. But if you pull and twist at the same time, it'll twist down the length of that wire, and hopefully we can avoid breaking it. So, and this may not move much, but even if we get it down just a little bit, that would be helpful. Everybody's listening for the crack.
We're all waiting.
It'll be the first time.
Do we have a saw? Maybe we'll try to put a little wedge under here. We have a little mini saw. Now, if this were a white pine and we took a wedge out under the branch, we could get the tissue to line up just right, it would probably heal back over. With the black pine, even if you get it to line up, it's not going to heal. But if we do it right, we can get it to close a little bit and it'll look a little more natural. So, yeah, it'll work. All right, so I'm just going to take a little wedge out. Move the branch here and see if this works. We can probably cut a good third of the way near the branch and it should be fine. You can also split above the branch, but I like to try to avoid that because that's very obvious when you do that. Whereas if you go underneath it, it'll at least close a little bit. That's more flexible now. You might have to put a little heavier guide on here.
Did you ever put some piece of metal between the back two together?
Yeah, so you'll see that quite a bit where you take a piece of, thicker piece of wire, for example, like this, and stick it through here and wrap it up. Excuse me, that doesn't really pull the branch that much further down. Really what it does is just makes this into one piece, so it looks cleaner and nicer. So what we usually do is leave this open until the very end after we finish the entire tree. That way you have the option to adjust it up or down a little bit more. And at the very end we'll clean it up. So that came down just a little bit more. So you've got the wedge right underneath here. I'm going to replace it with I don't know if we have the right side. Oh, yeah, right here. What is this? 16. We'll go with the 14. I'm going to replace that guy with a little bit heavier one. See if we can get it a little further down. I'm afraid that the guy that we have on here right now is actually going to snap. This branch is a little stiffer than I originally thought. So before we take that one off, we'll replace it with this, and then we'll snap the other one. We'll cut the other one. Just a little bit more. Famous last words, right? Okay. So that helped out just a little bit. It's very subtle, but all these things help in the long run. So what we'll do with this is leave it completely open rather than twisting it up at the end of the styling. That way, over the course of the next few weeks or a couple months, you can slightly pull it down a little further. You get a little bit better angle there. All right, so now this section is pressed too far down. I'm going to raise the end of it up and bring it around, so around to the outside and back in, so it looks a little nicer. Now with the tree like this being relatively thin and elegant, we don't want to make the first pad absolutely massive, just a single pad here. I want to break it up probably into two down here and then one more up here. So on this first branch, there'll be 3 separate pads. You guys have any other questions so far? Anything?
To enthrall. There's anything else. One thing on
branch that is broken, what would be your plan for the tree?
They're running out the door.
Yeah, if that branch had broken, we still could actually design the tree as it is on this angle. I still think it would be pretty nice. What I would say is, if this had broken, we would pull both of these way down. This branch would then sit right about here, and it would be more of a long-term development. I'd say, okay, we'll grow this branch out very long to replace this foliage over here. So it's less important where the branches come out of the trunk, and more important where the foliage pads end up. So just because this starts up high here doesn't mean that the foliage pad can't end up down here. That's totally fine.
You could end up with a little out here.
There you go. So when I set these branches too, I want to fan everything out basically like a hand, right? So everything gets fanned out. With the black pines, they tend to backbud pretty readily if you do that. With the juniper, we would fan it out and actually lightly layer some of the back branches around. But with this, we'll fan it out just like a hand and hopefully get light near the inside and it'll pop out on its own. And then it'll fill in that back space. It already has quite a few backbuds on it already, so we'll still have sort of a 3D look to the branch. Because this tree's never been fully detail wired in this way, some of the needles don't really sit upright. It's not that it's unhealthy, it's just that it would have been slightly shaded out. A lot of this growth was upright, so a lot of it was being shaded out beforehand. So the needles aren't going to all sit right up like we want them to. But now that we're doing it this way, we're getting those buds, the new buds in the upright position. As the new candles elongate this year and you cut them back, there'll be a lot harder, nicer upward growth on the plant. So it'll still look slightly unrefined, but that's to be expected at this stage in the styling process. We'll try to get it as nice and clean and pretty as possible. All right, so as I fan the branches out, I'm also trying to create a flat bottom to them as well. So that involves dropping them down, lifting the tips up just slightly. Fujikawa's preference, and my preference as well, is not to see too much of the underside of the branch, so dropping them down and just lightly raising the tips up. So that you still see pretty much all green along the base here. Some people like to really raise them up so you can see the brown underneath. I like to see that with bigger trees, and maybe with sort of a literati style tree. But with a plant this size and this style, I prefer not to see that. As you see the upper side of the branch as well, if you have some needles that are sticking out of the profile here, we can actually go through and cut them, just to bring them back in and make it look a little nicer. You don't want to give the whole thing a haircut necessarily, but if there are 2 or 3 or 4 needles here and there sticking out, we'll cut those off. And that just adds an extra bit of refinement to it. Also, too, I mentioned we want to try to get all the needles to sit upright in the same direction. So in a single cluster, if you've got a few needles that are going back the opposite direction, I try to take those off first. I take the needles on the bottom as well, and then we try to get everything just sitting upright in the same direction. It really, it's a bit sort of OCD, I guess, but it makes the trees look much, much better. I mentioned that we'll be making probably 3 pads on this first branch here. The difference in the height of the pads doesn't have to be very much. In the case of this tree, it's about 1 centimeter, maybe 2 centimeters at most. So I'll flip this back around so you guys can see it in just a second. But have a weak branch on the tree or areas with weak buds, we want to leave more needles in those areas. So needle density determines energy distribution on the tree. So when we needle pluck, I mentioned we do it at coca and all at the same time in the summer. You can also do it in the fall. It doesn't really matter that much. But when you do it, the weaker areas of the tree leave 10 to 12, maybe even up to 14 pairs of needles around each of the buds. And the stronger areas, you could take that back to 6 to 8.
Your fall is our autumn.
What's that?
Your fall is our autumn.
You guys call it autumn here?
Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't have a shortened word for autumn. Something with an EY or an O at the end of it. If you're going to cut a cluster of needles, reach in and grab it, pull it out, and slice it all at once. These sleeves aren't that sharp, but that way you're not cutting back through and breaking the tips off some of the needles, and it just looks a little cleaner. So if you need to cut a full cluster like that, grab it from the base, pull it out, just like you're doing a haircut.
Now they'll brown off at the ends.
If you use really sharp scissors and you, when you water it, you spray the needles for the first few days after you do it, they won't turn that brown. You get a teeny tiny bit of browning on them, but not enough to notice. And if we were to do this for a show, we would cut the needles the day of the show, or the day before the show. Now, if you go to the Kokofu or any major exhibition in Japan, every one of the black pines and most of the red pines will have had at least some needles cut.
You don't lose points for that?
What's that?
You don't lose points in the voting for that?
Actually, yeah, you don't. But there's some really interesting stuff that people will do. Like if you have a fruiting tree and it's not fruiting at the right time, or it doesn't have the right amount of fruit on it, a lot of times nurserymen will go to other trees and they'll cut the fruit off and jam it on. So a couple of years ago there was what was it, a persimmon? It was a nice, big, beautiful persimmon covered in orange fruit. And from distance it looked awesome. Even up close it looked really good. But somebody noticed that it wasn't just the fruits that had been taken off of another tree and put on it, it was the branches with the fruits on them and glued on the tree. That's relatively rare though. So.
Would that be a disqualification?
What's that?
Would that be a disqualification?
So the Taikon 10 is a bit more of an open show, I guess would be a nice way to say it. There's no prejudging for that show. So whereas the Kokofu, the trees have to go up to be prejudged about 2 weeks before the opening of the event. So for that, there's usually about 500 trees that get brought up and about 50% get cut. So the standards are really high. So if you were to bring a tree like that up to the Kokofu, it would definitely get disqualified. Whereas the Taikon 10 is sort of an all-inclusive show. So professionals will put their trees in the Taikon 10. Rank amateurs will do it as well. You don't see too many trees that are that bad in the Taikon 10. Because what ends up happening for that show, even though there's no prejudging, the trees that get put in have to go through a professional nursery because they don't want the general public coming in on setup day. So you have to go through a professional nursery, and professional nurseries have to maintain a certain level of quality. I mean, they don't want to be putting in complete junk and ruining their own reputations from their customers. So that sort of weeds out the bad stuff.
So it'd be a bit of a walk of shame, wouldn't it, on setup day?
Yeah,
Keep walking back out.
Every once in a while, there's a tree that's like, are you sure you want to put that in here? But for the most part, the quality is pretty high. And just to give you guys an idea of what it costs to put a tree in a show in Japan, the Taikon 10 is for the regular sort of 6-foot kind of smaller displays. It's $500 to put the tree in. And for the larger sort of feature displays, which end up being, you know, maybe 3 meters across, a little less than 3 meters across, those are $1,000 for those displays. So very expensive, and that's just the fee for the Japanese Bonsai Association. If you want it prepped by a professional beforehand, that's an additional fee. So and it just depends on the nursery that you take it to as to what the cost will be. But that's usually anywhere from $200 up to $500, depending on the size of the plant. Kokufu, if you take it up to the prejudging, just to take it there to get prejudged, even if it gets kicked out, costs you $500. If the tree makes it into the show, it's usually another $1,000 or so. So you end up spending about $1,500 to get a tree in the Kokufu, plus the cost of the plant. So that's why I said the pages in the photo book for the Kokufu, you're looking at close to 10 grand. For the cost of the tree, the cost of the prep, and the cost to get it in the show. But that show is, I mean, it's for art collectors basically, and it's actually considered a complete amateur show. So the trees that go into the Kokufu have to be bought and completely paid for by an amateur. They can't be owned by a professional. Now, almost every single one of them is maintained and created by a professional. But they have to be owned by amateur people. So that's why it's called an amateur show. But, yeah.
And how many like major prizes are there in those? What are the categories?
Yeah, so for the Kokufu, it fluctuates from year to year. There aren't really set categories, so it's just whatever is the best of the best at that show. So sometimes it might be 3 deciduous trees and 1 conifer. It might be 2 large trees and 1 small tree, or one large tree and 3 small trees. So it really just depends. There's a little bit of politicking that goes on behind the scenes with that too. No money under the table or anything like that, but the quality of the trees at the Kokufu is so high that really any of them could win. So there's a little bit of talking behind the scenes about which trees are kind of getting pushed for the award. So it's per request of the customer who owns the tree.
Yeah.
But the Taikon 10 is completely different. They have several categories there. I think maybe 10, 12, 15 categories. It's a lot of categories at that show. Everything from literati to root over rock to root on rock to best deciduous. They have best deciduous large tree, best deciduous chuhin, so on and so forth. All of those awards are sponsored by individual businesses or by the local government in Kyoto. So what happens is the professionals will go through and pick out the top 5 or so trees in each category. They'll pull them out. Then another round of professionals will go through and weed that down to the top 2 or 3 in each category. And then they'll let the monetary sponsors who know nothing about bonsai come through and pick the ones that they like for the award. So that weeds out the bad stuff so that they can kind of keep the quality a little high, at least for the awards there. But they usually end up picking really nice trees.
What's the award?
I think the top award is there's a Prime Minister's Award, I think, that's given out at that show, I believe. They also have a Prime Minister's Award at the soccer field. There's all sorts of local businesses, the local government, so, and it's just based on the category. So, best shooting, whatever, best root over rock and whatnot. There's no money involved. You don't win any money at those shows. It's just prestige. So, bragging rights.
does all the money go to then?
Yeah, so just to rent the facility for the Thai content is about $10,000 a day to rent that place, so it goes to that. Yeah, so we're there for 5 or 6 days. You know, so they're spending, 50 grand or so just to rent it. They sell tickets for the event too, which I think they're like $8 a piece, something like that. And that helps cover it as well. And then those sponsors as well will. Their money goes towards paying for the venue too. Okay, so this is what we want the branch to look like, right? As I mentioned before, some of the needles aren't really sitting completely upright, but we've created 3 layers on this one branch. One here, one slightly lower, and then this at the very bottom down here. It's all fanned out, everything's flipped up just slightly at the tips. And you guys are sitting underneath, so you're probably seeing more at the bottom of the branch than what I'm seeing up here. But later when you come up and take a look at it, kind of get in this position, probably if you just stood there, you could actually be kind of at my height for what I'm looking at, and you'll be able to tell that I've got it lined up just right so you don't see too much of the underside of the branch there. Right? And the nice thing, as I mentioned before, about this particular branch here is that it covers up this area here that's very thick, and it's not so far on that downward angle. So we'll fix that over time, though, again, as I said, by pulling this down. Maybe 2 months from now, crank it a little more. A couple months later, crank it a little more until we get this section as far down as possible. Right? Okay. You guys have any questions so far about this? Can you see? You can see the difference, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. Just making sure. All right. Okay.
So, as I promised, have a 10-minute break, grab some coffee. Mickey's, there's bars still open for a drink, and Bjorn still working. Thanks, guys. All right, guys, come on. Alright, let's go, guys. Everyone grab a seat. If we're mumbling around.
Somebody else said that he's getting too domestic.
Well, if you've got questions, don't be scared to ask, you know. We'll lead out for good time and learn. So, back to it.
All right, so it's already 9 o'clock, so there's definitely no way we're going to finish detailing the entire tree. But like I said before, I'm going to get the bones set on the front, and we'll see how far we get along with detailing it out. So we always start with the bottom pad first, the very bottom branch, and work up to the next pad, and so on and so forth till we get to the apex. The reason we do that is because we are dropping the branches down, so if we were to start at the top and pull these down, we'd smack the branches below it and we'd smack those. So I always start at the bottom of the tree, just for practical reasons. Alright, so now that we've got this one set, our next branch is going to be this one on the side here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it down, probably guy wire it as well, to the gin at the bottom here, just to get the right angle. Because the movement of the tree is to the right, I want everything on the left side of the tree, so everything on the opposite side of the movement to be as far down as possible and pulled in nice and tight. That way it's not confusing as to which direction the tree is moving. Sometimes you look at a tree and if it's not styled properly, everything's kind of out to the side. Your eye it's a little difficult to tell which way it's going. But if we over-exaggerate it by pulling stuff down and closer to the trunk and in a little bit closer to the profile, on the opposite side of the movement, that'll kind of force our eye out in the right direction. So that's what I'm going to do with this branch. We'll pull it down pretty far here.
Is that gin going to go eventually?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, we may leave it for now. It's not the best gin there, but It'll be shortened. I wouldn't cut it back completely because I don't think it'll heal over that well if you do that. And as a matter of fact, this tree actually has a shari running up to the middle over here. I don't want to accentuate that at this point. I'd actually like it to try to bark over a little bit. I don't really want the shari in there. Eventually it's going to cave in and you'll see it. That's fine. You can use it as a feature, I guess. But for now, excuse me, I'd rather keep it as solid as possible. So. There's a very famous black pine in Japan. It has a name, and I'm blanking on the name right now. But the base of it, the trunk of it is about as big around as this turntable. It's huge. But it's not that tall. It's only maybe 8 tall. They won the Kokufu Prize, I think maybe 15, 20 years ago. Really, really nice tree. Had a solid, completely solid round trunk on it. And about 5, 6 years ago, one of the apprentices, I think it was at Daiju at the nursery I mentioned earlier that has all the black pines, he was cleaning it up with some tweezers on the bark to get some of the needles that had fallen in and off. And tweezers went all the way through the trunk to the back of the trunk. So it turned out that the whole inside of it had rotted out over the years. And you would have thought that it would have ruined the tree, but it actually, I think, makes it a little more interesting. So.
That wasn't down Takamatsu, was it?
No, it might have been on display down there.
Down there, the number one tree?
It might have been, yeah.
He was a beer baron, was that the guy?
What's that?
Was he a beer baron?
What's a beer bear?
Beer?
Beer. Sells lots of beer.
He made
Made a fortune out of
beer.
I don't know about the owner of the tree, actually.
Yeah, it sold lots of beer. And it was the number one tree, I think it was the number one tree when we were...
Were you there?
I've got the master book.
Was that a couple years ago for the
This is going back when you were saying.
Oh, that long ago?
Yeah,
Okay.
that long ago.
Yeah, that tree's been in and out of different people's collections, so you might be referring to Daiso Iwasaki, is that who you're talking about? Is the owner? He didn't sell beer, he was a pachinko. You guys know what pachinko is? It's
He wasn't, he just bought plants, he never,
Look at the bonsai fish.
Right.
He just bought plants, he
Yeah,
just had bonsais everywhere.
Yeah, so there was a fellow named Daiso Iwasaki, he passed away a couple of years ago.
Iwasaki?
Iwasaki?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's him, yeah.
Yeah, so he owned pachinko parlors. Pachinko parlors are, it's a Japanese gambling, a form of gambling. He made an absolute fortune with that, but I don't know exactly how it's played. I think it's like a pinball machine, sort of. And you put these little balls in and it spits other balls out. I don't know exactly how it works, but the pachinko parlors are everywhere in Japan, and I refuse to ever set foot inside of one. So if you walk by them and the door's open, all of this sound just comes barreling out, right? And when the door's shut, it's silent. You can't hear anything. So they have special made doors to keep the sound from irritating the neighborhood folks. But I refuse to set foot in one. But yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago. I think it was in his 90s at the time. And his entire collection has now moved up to Tokyo. The fellow that you mentioned earlier who sold the tree for $1.3 million. All of the trees from Iwasaki's collection are now at his nursery. So I was up there just a few weeks ago, and it's several acres of trees. I mean, just tons and tons. They run in tractor trailers to move the trees up from Shikoku up to his nursery. And incredible trees too. Really nice to see.
I haven't got the book I've lent it, otherwise I would have bought it and shown you.
Yeah, I can see that.
You're not coming back next week, are you? No.
So from the proper front, right through here, you can see the branches starting to move into position. I do want to get it down just a little bit further, get a little bit better angle here. And again, when I put the guy wire on, I'm usually putting it a little bit closer to the front part of the branch here. If you take it out to the end and put it here, all that's going to happen is it's going to bow the branch. You bend the tip down, but the section will stay the same. So you want to try to get it in the middle or a little bit closer to the trunk. Again, we're just pulling and twisting here. All right, so when we set this branch, we want it to be on a slightly different horizontal plane than both of these. Ideally, I would probably like to get it to sit between these two, right here. It's very subtle, but bonsai are small, so they get very visually boring very quickly. So you want to make sure that all of the branches end up on different horizontal planes and that they end up on different vertical planes as well. So what I mean by that is if this branch ends here, we don't want another branch ending directly on top of it. It either needs to be slightly off one side or slightly in to the other side. So everything is broken up on the entire tree. Okay. So I'm just going to continue setting the bones like we talked about earlier. Do the same with this back branch here. And I want to get the apex down as well, so you guys can see what I mean by a long neck versus a proper height there. So you'll have to adjust the size of the thickness of the guy wire to the thickness and pliability of the branch that you're trying to move. It's the same when you're repotting a tree too. I noticed in the workshop the last few days, I repotted a few trees with folks, and the tendency is to choose a wire that's way too thin to hold the tree into place. So I think everybody maybe needs to think about one size up or even two sizes up in general with their wiring. For both guy wires and for tying it into the pocket.
So how have you found Australia and the bonsai scene in Australia?
That's been really good so far. I think the quality in Australia is on par with what folks are doing in the States right now. There are a few newer nurseries on the West Coast that have been opened recently by people who have studied in Japan. I'm talking in the States, and they're really changing the level of quality back there. But in general, I think that the quality level is about on par between Australia and the U.S. So I find it interesting that you guys have some unique native species that you're trying to utilize for bonsai as well. I mean, if you think about it, in Japan, the stuff that they use there, it's all their native material, and they've been experimenting for decades and decades and decades to get the right techniques to make them work in bonsai culture. So that's all you really need to do with your material here. Obviously, some of it won't work, but you got to find the stuff that does work and develop the techniques that you can utilize to make the best bonsai possible out of them. So I had the pleasure of visiting Quentin's collection last week. I got to see some of the material that at its full potential, really. Some really nice stuff. So.
Did he cut his grass?
He did. He actually did.
So we're getting the branches kind of down where they need to be. I don't want to see the full length of the brown part of the branch, which we talked a little bit about that here, using this to cover that up. So I want to do the same here. So for example, this bud will pull around this way. We'll probably pull these in a little bit tighter here. If you can see the full length, it looks young and kind of weak and not full. So we can create the illusion that it has back buds by wiring these down and shortening up the visual length of that branch. Same thing here. When we detail this up, we'll be pulling these in and around that way to shorten it visually. But if you notice, the angle of this branch is much, much better now, right? You guys can See that? It's on that sharp downward angle there. And then we flip the tips up just slightly, right? All right, so now we'll move up the trunk. Get the branches up above set. So here, now we're probably gonna have to go around the trunk once up here. But everything from here up will eventually be covered by the foliage when we get it pulled around. That'll help eliminate that long neck appearance. So the wire that we do end up going around the trunk with here will be covered by the foliage, so it's all right.
What gauge are you using there?
This is size 8 actually, and there's probably one size too big. Well, I guess we have a 10 there. That's all right. This is a little large for this branch. And normally what I would do, what I recommend that you guys do is go maybe for the thicker wires like this and the thicker branches, try not to put on the heaviest gauge possible. Maybe take it one step down. So disregard what I said earlier about always thinking one step up. When you get to the larger branches, maybe think one step down, but double up on it, right? So we could have used the size 10 on this and then doubled up with that. But I went ahead and cut the 8, so we'll use it for now. The reason I say that is because if you really try to put this heavy-duty wire on, and you haven't built up the strength in your hands and the techniques to get it on there properly, you run the risk of really damaging the live tip. So I'm able to support it pretty well, so it shouldn't be an issue. But it would have been a little bit better choice to have gone one size down on this to a size 10 and then double that. This will also save us some time though, so. So you mentioned the Zusho that I worked on earlier. That tree was just slightly taller than this, not too much taller, a little bit wider, but it took 70 hours of wiring to get it done. The reason that is because Zusho, it's a dwarf cultivar of white pine. They're very famous and popular because the trunks thicken really quickly, but the foliage stays tiny. So most of the foliage is about the size of your pinky fingernail. So you get little teeny tiny clusters. And with those trees, you have to really wire up every single individual little branch on it to get it to look right. So it takes forever. Whereas most projects that we do end up taking, like I said before, a day to probably 2.5 days max.
Did you do all the wiring yourself, or did you get a helper?
Yeah, I do all the wiring myself. So whenever we get a tree into the shop and Fujikawa-san assigns it to one of us, it's only one person per tree. So it's not like you see in Bonsai Focus, like the Italians, where they've got like 6 people on the tree right next to each other, wiring one little branch. No, we don't do that.
So if you mess it up, it's yours to mess up.
I think that's exactly right.
I don't want to share it.
Was that Zushio a client's tree, or did it belong to the nursery?
That belonged to the nursery, so that was one that was purchased at an auction. And I wired it up and then we sold it a few days later. So. And normally what Fujikawa-san will do is he'll have a client in mind when he's at an auction and he sees a tree. He usually knows which clients will buy which trees. He has sort of a set on the client base. Of course we have random folks come in throughout the year, but we do have our core group of customers, so he's pretty aware of what they'll probably purchase. So.
With these customers that have these collections, do they look after them themselves, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're going to spend, $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 on a tree, you don't want to take it home and kill it in your backyard. So they'll leave it with a professional nursery. We'll maintain it for them during the year for a fee. It's a monthly fee. Depends on the size of the tree. It also depends on the nursery as to what the fee is. But at Colca N, it's anywhere from 30 to 50 bucks a month. So not too bad. And that includes just your very basic maintenance. So basic pruning, of course watering, fertilizing. If we style the tree up, that'll be a separate fee. And that, again, depends on the size of the plant. It could be anywhere from 100 bucks up to $500 to style the plant. And then some of our customers will come in once a month. Some of them will come in once every couple of weeks. We have some that only come in once a year or once every 3 years to see their trees.
Okay, so they've got this collection, but they don't actually see them.
They don't actually see them. So what often happens? What's that? It's it can be. So the trees that, for example, they buy and they don't come and see them for 2, 3, 4 years. They usually purchase them when they're slightly underdeveloped, with the intention of having us develop them over the course of 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 years, and then putting them in the kokufu or something like that. So those trees, yeah, that can be a good investment for people. Most of the time, clients aren't going to be making money on the trees. They're going to buy it, keep it with us for maybe 6 months or so. They'll buy it in the summer with the intention of putting it in the kokufu the next February. And some clients will hold on to the trees after that. They'll keep them at the nursery with us. Some of them will want to sell it immediately. So it's just sort of bragging rights for some folks. Other folks are
That
more.
was my next question. So is
Yeah.
it just to say I own a $20,000?
For some people it is.
Yeah.
For some folks, they really love having a collection of high quality material like that, and they will come in and see it very regularly. But we'll also take it to clients' homes if they're going to have a house party or something. We'll take it to their homes, we'll take it to their businesses. It just depends on who it
That's
is.
what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah.
Then when they have a special event
Yeah,
or a
special
special
event,
function,
special
you
occasion,
can
yeah.
take it down there.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would happen if one of those trees dies? Would it
Yeah.
dies in your care?
Yeah, so it's, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in the United States, it's a very litigious society. So you have to sign a contract for everything. These things, but in Japan, they don't sign contracts for anything. It's all word of mouth. So the customers that are going to be buying, the $20,000, $50,000 trees are usually our regular customers that we've known for a long time and customers built up a good relationship with. So if a tree dies, there's sort of an unspoken agreement that they're not really going to get any of their money back out of it.
Oh, God.
So it's a case-by-case basis. It depends on the client. We've never had that issue before, but there is a very famous nursery, the nursery where my boss studied, Bonsai. It's an incredible nursery. If you guys ever have a chance to visit, it's in Omiya, Bonsai Village. But a few years ago, when Mr. Kato died, the grandfather died, the grandson took over the shop, and he really, really wanted to turn it into a more traditional-looking nursery. So he had a new facility built. It's at the same location, but they had a new facility built, and on the roof, they lined it with copper. So when it rained, the copper runoff ended up getting in the pots of some of the trees, and it was so highly concentrated that it killed them. And the problem was that it wasn't just your average bonsai, it was about 10 of the top trees in the country. And it was almost overnight that they died off. It was just a huge mistake. It just was completely unexpected. So I think they ended up losing well over $1 million with the and a lot of those trees were owned by clients. So I don't know exactly what they did in that situation, but the nursery is still running, they're still fine. But
Is that tree that the old Mr. Cato had that was over 1,000 years old, is that still there?
that one's still alive, yeah, that one's still there. So
This was a beautiful tree. We went to his nursery. It was
Yeah.
lovely.
yeah, it's an incredible shop.
It's only 500 years old, but it wasn't a lot.
No. That. Now.
Just about 10.
Well, that tree, before down at, is it whatever his name is down south?
Iwasaki?
Yeah, that was about 500 years old, wasn't it?
Probably, yeah. It's
Yeah,
very, very old.
about 700 years old. And the manager said, there was a manager there, because he was in Shanghai, Mr. Uzumaki, and the manager said, this is my favourite tree, and that's 500 years old. So that one was the tree of the national tree one was 700 years old. Just a little bit younger than me. While we're on the subject of the old girl of the club, I just want to congratulate our members, our committee, and Ben. I don't need that. And I just want to thank them. This is one of the best workshops, exhibition I think our club in over the 40 years has ever had. And I just want to thank our committee and the workers that were there as well, Quinton, Han, and all the ones that were helping. Look, it's just been fantastic. And of course you can't beat this man here. Yeah. He's working on my tree tomorrow.
There's nothing in it for her, is there?
No, I just think it's been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you guys for having me. It's been a
You
lot
can
of fun.
see by the crowd here tonight.
Yeah, this is one of the bigger crowds I've done a demo for, so.
You weren't nervous, were you?
Not at all. Sweating.
So where are you off to next?
Let's see, on Thursday this week I'll head down to Tasmania. This is all for bonsai stuff. Then I'll head over to Brisbane, then up to Cairns, and then back to Japan. So I'll be in Japan for a week, and then I have a 6-week teaching tour in the States after that. So
Busy.
very busy. Yeah, this year I'm on the road 7 months out of the year.
Does your wife go with you?
Sometimes, yeah, I'll fly her with me sometimes, but it just gets too expensive to do it every single time. So I have to go teach in. I say I have to. It's pretty cool. I get to go teach in France in December.
Wow.
So I'm going to. We're gonna.
Back in France.
Yeah. So for Christmas we'll maybe spend it in Paris or something. It'd be kind of cool, right? So,
Brownie points.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a junket to me.
Got any children yet?
not yet. No.
Christmas time. Come
Yeah.
Christmas.
Do you plan to stay in Japan?
For probably another 2 more years. So on the side, I started working on my doctorate there a couple years ago, and I've got a couple years left to finish that up. So once I finish that, if I finish that, we'll probably go back to the States in 2017. If not, the latest will be 2018. But planning on setting up a school and a shop in probably East Tennessee or North Georgia, perhaps North Carolina, over in the Smoky Mountain region. So I'm originally from Tennessee, and we'd like to be semi-close to my parents. And there's a wide open market there right now. There's no schools in that part of the country. They're all on the west coast in the States. So we'll try to set that up. There should be quite a few people actually who are studying in Japan now that are from that region, and they'll be moving back there as well. So we have a good community to work with there. Okay. So my dad and I have been doing it, we did it as a father-son hobby for a long time, and he eventually became the president of the Knoxville Bonsai Society. He just actually handed it over to somebody else this last summer, but he did that for about a decade. It's sort of become a side business for him, so at my parents' house they have quite a bit of material that they have been selling to the local club members there, but it's nothing commercial, nothing huge. So they have their full-time jobs as well. So.
Are they on some of the ceramics and stuff online? Or is that...
They don't know, but if you go to my website, actually, if you just go to Google and type in my name, it'll pop up my website. It's probably easier to do that than for me to give you the name of it. That's relatively long. But if you just go to Google and type in my name, you can visit my site, and I've got lots of antique Chinese pots on there. We're starting to build up some nice tokoname pots, and we'll be selling some plant material, which you guys can't necessarily buy down here, but if you're interested in anything on the site, you can contact me or purchase it through the site.
Because we have a lot of trouble getting really dry spots here
Right.
that don't weigh 300 kilos,
Yeah.
made out of concrete.
Right. Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, so I've got quite a few antique Chinese pots on my site right now. They're a bit on the pricey side, but most of them are between 150 and 200 years old. So very, very old pots. But you know, as your all's trees become better and better quality, show quality, you'll need a nice antique pot to put them in. So,
Nice spruiking, Bjorn. Nice
That's right.
spruiking.
Where did you get those? How did you get those antique?
So at the professional auctions, they not only sell bonsai, but they also sell pots there too. So yeah, I have access to some very unique, interesting, very old pots.
He had some lovely pots down at Tekanetsu. He had some beautiful antique pots down there.
Yeah, that's something I should probably mention too. The kokufu, if you want to put a tree in the kokufu, because the quality of the trees is so high, one way to set your tree apart from another person's tree, trying to get it into the show, is to change out the pot. So most of the trees will get put in antique Chinese pots about 2 days before they get taken up for the exhibition, or for the prejudging rather. And some of those pots are 300, 400, 500 years old. Incredible pots that sell for big money.
So the tree doesn't stay in after the...
Nope, after the exhibition, they'll get popped out and they'll get put right back in their previous pot. So, most of the time they get slightly, well, they're maintained in rather small pots, so that when they get shifted over to the exhibition pots, they can up-pot them just slightly. And then they don't have to mess with the root system. There's an episode of the Bonsai Art of Japan. I mentioned that earlier, right? Yeah, Bonsai Art of Japan. Yeah, so if you go to YouTube or you go to my website, you can see the video series on there. But there's an episode that we did showing the process of preparing the trees for the kokufu. There's a very big Shishigashira Japanese maple that we put in the show back in 2013. And we take you through the whole process of how that got prepared. And part of that process was switching up the pot. So it was in a not very good Chinese pot, relatively new Chinese pot that had been maintained in during the year. We popped it out of that at the very end of January, just before the prejudging event, into a 200-year-old antique Chinese pot. And the tree looked absolutely awesome. Totally changed the appearance of it. So,
Can you remember what episode that was?
what's that?
Can you remember what episode it was?
What episode?
Oh.
No, I can't, no. Somewhere probably in the mid-30s, I would think. Yeah.
I think I remember.
Do you like Shishigashira?
Yeah, it's a really nice cultivar to work with. They take a long time to develop. That particular tree has been in the collection of one of our top customers for probably 30 years. So he had taken it from something probably with a base like that, which is still pretty big, you know, about that diameter. Now the base is like that, so it's absolutely incredible. Most of the Shishigashiras are grafted on standard Acer palmatum, so Japanese maple root bases, and that was the case with this tree. And those tend to fatten up a little bit quicker than just the Shishigashira root system. So the Bonsai Art of Japan video series that I have, it covers a huge range of topics. They're not necessarily that in-depth, so if you wanted to get a little bit more in-depth information about certain species, I have other videos that are digital download through my website. It costs a little bit of money. I think they're like $20 a piece, something like that. But they go really in-depth into Japanese maple, Shishigashira, trident maple care, and we have another one that's all about junipers that covers Shinpaku, procumbens, and Junipers rigida, which is needle juniper. So you can go to my site and download those as well if you're interested. And we also have a documentary that we put together about what it's like behind the scenes as an apprentice and as a professional in Japan. So I spent the whole year, I think it was 2013, spent the whole year shooting footage, and we released the documentary last year. It's, I guess, about an hour long or so, but you can download that through my site as well. So it covers the whole range. We start at the beginning of the year, show what it takes to prep all the trees for the kokufu and to travel up there and set up the sales booth. And then we move into spring and show all the behind the scenes for that and all the way through to the fall. So if you're interested in something like that, you can get it to my site.
Do you consider that Shishishigiri does not air layer as easily as come up?
It does actually air layer very easily. We have a stock plant back in Tennessee that we've been taking air layers off of for quite a while, and they tend to air layer pretty quickly, usually within one growing season. And we're air layering stuff that's about king size. So.
Going back to the very first one you pulled out, I was thinking when you cut underneath there, you wouldn't bother with paste or anything like that?
Yeah, it is bleeding a little bit, so it'd probably be a good idea to toss a little cut paste under there. It's case by case basis, so some of the black pines will bleed profusely. This one's bleeding just a little bit, not too bad. If it's not really bleeding that much at all, you don't necessarily have to put that on there. But it doesn't hurt, so it's a good question. Yeah, we should definitely probably put some on there. So.
Talking of that lower branch, you had the gin there, which was pretty handy for the wiring.
This one here?
No, the
Oh,
other
this one back here? Yeah.
So what would you have done if that wasn't there?
If that wasn't there, probably what I would have done is actually used a single piece of wire. We did it on a couple of the trees in here. I'm trying to think which ones we did it on. But we took a single piece of wire, actually went around the trunk, and then took the two ends out down the length of the branch. So if you do it right, you can follow the same pitch down. So whose tree did we do that to the other day? I'm trying to think. That you? I might have done it on that one this morning, actually. Yeah. Some of the trees, I definitely have that on there, but that way you can just use a single piece of wire, go around the trunk once, and out onto the branch if you've got nothing else to anchor it to. I prefer to do that rather than wrap in circles up the trunk. It just looks really messy. So, and it holds it out as well, particularly if you're going to be using a guy wire anyway to pull everything down.
What's your experience with Suzuki Krupuria?
Yeah, we've had a few in the shop. They're not very popular right now in Japan. And the reason is that they tend to shed branches unexpectedly, so they're very hard to maintain long term. They can look absolutely incredible if you do them right. We had one, we still have it at the shop, that sold for a very high price about 15 years ago. And then I came in 2008, and about 2 years after I came in, it started to shed branches. And now it looks like a total mess. And there's nothing you can really do about it once they start dropping branches. One way you can hedge against that is some nurseries will actually build a system of mirrors that reflect the sunlight up under the branches, and that'll help keep them alive. We did not do that with this tree, and it is pretty bad at this point, but they can look really nice. So if you go back in the kokufu books and look back at the ones from, say, the late 70s through really the late 80s, kind of in that period there, you'll see tons of cryptomeria, and they're really well done. Now if you look at the kokufu books, you're lucky if you see one on a yearly basis. There are some species that just don't do well long term.
Is the Shishiki black pines popular in Japan or not? Or was that dropped right away?
Yeah, the Shiki black pines are not popular at all right now in Japan. And when they were discovered, I don't know exactly when that would have been, they were huge. They were absolutely massive. People bought into them. Those are the, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, it's a cord bark black pine. I guess they came out of Shikoku. But now you can buy massive ones bigger than this with trunks like that for $200. So nobody wants them. They're relatively weak trees. Okay, so this upper part of the trunk right here, like I mentioned earlier, is very long. I'm going to take a guy wire from here to here, and we're going to shrink this down, and I'm going to pull this back in, and our apex will sit just slightly lower. Hopefully this will work all right. How are we doing on time? What time is it?
10 to 10.
10 to 10, okay. This will be perfect. We can get the bones all set.
Take as long as you want.
That one's moving.
So with the workshops, Bjorn, is there a few trees that you want to talk about or that stand out that you'll be surprised with, or anything?
Yeah, I'd say probably the biggest change out of any of them, and the one that turned out better than I was expecting, is that Scots pine right there in the middle, the double trunk one. When that was brought in, I kind of had an idea as to what I wanted to do with it, but I had no idea how flexible the branches would be. I've worked with Scots a lot in Europe, and they tend to be pretty flexible, so I thought perhaps we'd be able to get that style out of it, but it turned out a lot better than what I originally thought. So that one in particular was really nice.
And I've never seen Andrew smile that much before.
Yeah.
Where was he? Smiling.
Yeah.
He's still smiling.
Yeah, as we set the branches up, his grin.
Yeah.
And
each time
the apex in his face is just lit up. So.
David, bring it over and
Yeah.
show them.
Yeah, so this was quite a bit taller. These were very straight. The main trunks were. These were both alive, correct? These two branches right here. Yeah, they were alive. These
Stump up the middle.
Yeah, the stump up the middle. That was a trunk that you had air layered off, right?
Yeah.
Beforehand. Yeah. So there was a thicker trunk here that was air layered prior to the workshop, and then we worked that down. It still needs to be worked down a little bit more into the future, but you can see sort of the basic structure flows together pretty nicely. It needs to develop pretty quickly too, so it shouldn't take too long before that's a really, really nice plant ready to be put on exhibition. Alright, so you guys can see the apex has come down quite far. Now the branches are funky, so we're going to reset them in the opposite direction. You guys probably noticed I like to use guy wires quite a bit more than I think most people do. If you do it properly, they can look very nice and clean, and they tend to hold quite a bit better than your wrapped wire. You have to make sure you get them set up just right. So if we show a tree in, say, the kokofu, for example, they can have wire on every single branch. It's no problem as long as it's not really visible from the front view, but they can't have any guy wires on them. So you can sometimes get away with it by taking a black Sharpie, black marker, and running over the guy wires with that, and it'll make them blend in a little bit more. But you'll almost always get caught. So. right? So this is going to become, right now it's our apex, it's going to become a branch, and these here will become the apex. The longest demonstration I ever did was about 7 hours in Italy back in the spring. So it was a huge Sabina juniper. It's very similar to Toigawa Shinpaku in Japan. But it was absolutely massive, so they tend to like the trees big in Italy, I guess.
Did you get any help?
I didn't. What was that?
Do you do workshops and demonstrations in Japan?
I've done a couple in Japan. Actually, last year in Takamatsu, they had, for the first time, the Takamatsu Bonsai Convention. They do smaller conventions almost every year in Takamatsu, but last year it was a brand new, huge one that was sponsored by the local government. So I got asked to come down to do a demo of that, which was really cool. So it was myself, Taiga Rushibata from Taisho Nursery, which is where Joe goes to study. Where are you, Joe? Yeah, in the back there. Yeah, he goes to study over there quite a bit, so I did a demo one day, he did a demo the next day, and then there's a fellow named Koji Hiramatsu, which I'm sure some of you guys probably met him. He was at the national show, I think last year, is that right? This year. Okay. Yeah, he was the other demonstrator. He was actually the one who invited him down to demonstrate. The tree that I did for that demonstration was a giant taxus, a yew, and it looked like a yamadori. It was absolutely massive. It was a huge trunk, gnarly deadwood all the way up it. It turns out that it wasn't actually a yamadori. It was a tree that was owned by a floral company, and they had been cutting branches off of it for 70 years to use in floral arrangements, and it had just become really gnarly during that period. So, which was kind of cool. And it was owned by a 7-year-old. So his dad bought it for him as a kid.
Regularly, are you repotting the trees?
Sorry, was it?
Repotting the trees is an age, how often are you doing it?
With the black pines, we try to do it as little as possible, actually. Every time you repot a black pine, it weakens it for that subsequent growing season, and it becomes very difficult to do the full decandling process on it. Again, it's case-by-case basis. Some trees respond better than others. But typically what happens on the years that you repot it, rather than doing the two-stage thing where you cut the medium-strength candles first and the stronger ones later, you're only able really to cut the strongest ones that year. So you kind of limit the amount of development that you can do. So normally with the black pines, we try to go at least 3 to 5 years. Sometimes they go quite a bit longer. For some reason, I don't know if it's an enzyme in the roots. I'm not exactly sure what causes it, but with the black pines, they tend to break down the akadama a lot more quickly than a lot of the other species. I don't know what it is, but they'll be rock solid after a couple of years. So we try to push it off as much as possible by aerating the soil until we just can't get any water in it, and then we'll repot it the following spring. Yeah, there's about probably 5 more hours of detail watering on this.
It's all right, we got all night.
start to see the structure that we're trying to get out of the plant. This in mind is the front here. Right. So we just, like I said, we can spend another 5 or 6 hours detailing this up, and I think it's already 10 o'clock for tonight, so I don't want to push it too much longer. But yeah, this is sort of the basic structure. We'll start detailing all of this up in the next, ideally the next few days, because we've already done the first branch. It's good to go ahead and do the entire thing, so that we get everything fanned out and it all starts to grow at the same rate. So, do you guys have any questions about it? I don't want to bore you too much more with the detail wiring, but just imagine this look for the rest of the tree. All right, cool. Any other questions before we call it quits? No? Okay, cool. Thank you guys very much for.
Thanks again, Bjorn. That was always fantastic. So you can imagine what's been happening in the workshops, and Bjorn's been pretty much finishing just about. So it's been pretty awesome. It's been a great, 4 or 5 days so far. We've got a couple more days with Bjorn here. But we'd like to give you Bjorn a special little gift here. We know you can't carry too much on your plane ride, but it's a handmade Australian pot. Made by Hayden Denier. So we think that's big enough to put on the plane, so thank you very much. Hopefully you want to meet.
Yeah, thank you
something
very
very exciting. So thank you, Bjorn, again. So we'll draw the raffle. If you haven't got a raffle ticket, pick one up now before it goes. But again, come over and chat to Bjorn. He's going to be here for the next, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And have a look at the tree. But thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. So see you next time.
It's my camera, I don't know how to turn it off.
Alright, we're going to turn that right. Alright. It's a red ticket, D36, and it's Alright, so that's someone from the Bowls Club. Tuesday, the blue tickets, blue F15. F15, blue.